Hello, I'm Toycat, and one of the big economic mysteries of the entire planet has to be Argentina. This is a place that is geographically gifted in so many ways and has been the richest country on the entire planet multiple times, but despite that fact, Argentina still has one of the rockiest economies on the entire planet. For example, take a normal developing country that became developed, this is China's GDP slowly going upwards, and compare that to Argentina's where it's up and then down, and up and then down, and then up, and we're finally there, and then right back down again. It is a real problem that Argentina is facing, and it's not just in their overall GDP. You can see it in things like the interest rate. This is the United States' base interest rate, which is what loans charge on top of basically. The central bank will charge you about 5% to borrow money during these super high 20-year highs of economic interest rates in the United States, whereas in Argentina it's 81%. And the reason they need that is because their inflation is at 104%. Things right now would cost you 104% more than last year, and actually, wait, my bad. This isn't a current article. This is from April 20th. The current interest rate is 97% in Argentina. You would have to, that is an absolutely insane amount. You would pay a 97% plus the bank's fees interest rate on any loan you take. Everything in Argentina is going wild, and obviously this includes their currency, which was worth 117 pesos to the dollar just a year ago. Now it's worth 231, but usually when you see like, oh, well, over a year it's pretty bad. Over 5 years, it's way worse. It used to be worth 10 times more against the dollar, but thankfully, but like 5 years is really when that economic problem started. But no, if we go back 20 years, it used to be worth 100 times more versus the dollar. What the heck happened to Argentina? Genuinely, this is one of the big hard things to study as an economist around the world, because honestly, people can't quite put it into perspective. I mean, if you look at Argentina historically, it was one of the very wealthiest countries in the world. In the late 19th century, it was literally the richest. And by the way, just for a fun fact, because we're going to be covering it in this video, this map was made by an Argentine, which you don't need that text that's behind me to find that out, because they've included, funnily enough, the Falkland Islands and this other territory as part of Argentina. But the point being that when most European countries were doing pretty well for themselves, that late 19th century period, Argentina was doing better. In fact, so much better that when, British people and Irish people were leaving for America, people from the rest of Europe, Spain, France, Italy in particular, Germany even, were leaving for Argentina, which is why Argentina is one of the most European South American countries, because it was just so good living there. Seriously, greater than 40% in large parts of the country. This was a place that thrived. This was a place people wanted to go, and it was a place that was doing so well until about the 1920s. Sure, it was the very wealthiest country in the world, and realistically was top 5 for a very, very long time after that. And sure, a lot of people came into the country taking advantage of the natural geographic features, which, by the way, has to be said, there's something in economics called a comparative advantage. There are some countries that always are going to have a better base place than others. For example, the United States doesn't have to spend much on defense or international shipping because they're so isolated by oceans. Militarily speaking, it's very hard to invade, but also that means it's very easy for them to ship things out because they just throw it on a boat, and instead of having to build a road or a railway to Spain or Portugal or Argentina, for example, they throw it on a boat and the boat gets there. Having oceans around you is great for trade and really good for defense as well, in a kind of counterintuitive manner. And so the interesting thing about this is that Argentina has this in spades. They have ocean, of course, but they've also got highly arable land. I mean, you've probably heard something about Argentinian steak. Big reason for why. It's so easy to grow crops, or to grow animals that eat those crops, and then you use the animal as a crop. You can do all sorts of things with the land in Argentina, and it's also, although geographically super diverse, in reality is mostly covered for most major resources you'd want. You've got the arable land, well, that's great. You've got the great access to the ocean, and also not just ocean, but fresh water too. Argentina is a country that is not needing for water in any way, and you've got very little of your country that is, geographically vulnerable, except where the borders are. I mean, over here, Chile and Argentina, a lot of people question why they're even separate countries. It's because of the huge mountain range running between them. So they have a mountain range, which is very easily defensible, and then they really only have a little bit of border to the north between much smaller countries besides Brazil, but that's a whole separate thing right there. And so in general, Argentina has everything you need to be successful. And so what happened to it? How does a country which was doing so well before, the richest in the world, become not even the richest Latin American country? By the way, this Latin America map is inaccurate because it doesn't include Quebec, as we know every map of Latin America should. But even here you can see Argentina is 4th on this list right here. It should be the wealthiest country by far. It should be the country that makes the rest of its continent look bad, but now it is coming close to middling the table of Latin/South America. What happened here? And honestly, the easiest answer to this one, because like how do you have all these things? The easiest answer to this is to say, well, did you know something happened in Argentina somewhat recently, and it was a coup in 1930 after, like real great success. Something, because, I think something that really has to be said is that every country has two key things. They have their geography and they have their political geography. That's what geopolitics is kind of about. And a lot of countries that you picture being very rich, one of their key traits is their stability. And so Argentina figured, just like many countries, they're so rich that they can start to do some fun stuff. And so, honestly, maybe a military coup comes in, and, this is something that was happening a lot to the world in the 1930s. I can't really blame them for that. But thankfully, after this military coup, things went back to normal, and so it's really hard to work out what went wrong, except I'm lying, there was another coup in 1943. So after, again, like a country that's doing so well for itself, drawing people in, has this huge reign of, this huge instability, happened in the middle of World War II, though, and thankfully, honestly, this one was the last one because they transitioned back to democracy. You might not know that, but even though it had a fun thing that, there was a lot going on here, but they transitioned back to democracy and they had a real good democratic system. They elected a new, they had democratic elections and they had a new president, which was great until the third coup in 1955. And again, like at this point, I know I faked you out the last two times, but I can assure you the coup that happened in 1955 was the last coup until 1962, but that was the last one which happened until 1966. But at this point, the country finally transitioned back to democracy, and the real problem with the country is not the military situation, which, by the way, there was another coup, but thankfully, there was only 6 coups in total, which is, really pretty low when you think about it. I mean, when you have to talk about it and be like, yeah, there were 6 coups d'etats during the 20th century, that is... By the way, and that means that there were 14 dictators over 25 years, one every 1.7 years on average. This means the whole policy direction of the country changed quite drastically, which is really where the problems kind of come from. I think a lot of people tend to think about, economies as being really one of two things. It's either entirely done by politics, which, it's to some extent true. There are all sorts of countries that have really poor geographic features that have amazing economies. Singapore is always the great example. They're an island. They don't have enough fresh water. They have to import that from their neighbor who maybe has issues with them, and they're still one of the wealthiest places on the planet, generally in the top 3. So you got Singapore over there that's doing really well because of their politics, and so you might assume like everything's political, or you might go the other way and say, yeah, the only reason the US is doing great is because it owns a continent. The only reason the other richest countries in the world, even way back to, this time, like Australia's only on this list of, Australia, which includes New Zealand at this point. Good job, New Zealand being on the map. But the only reason Australia's... so this is a really inaccurate map because it's using current political geography for 1895. I'm just saying the richest country in 1895 would include India and also Canada. Anyway, point being is... The reason Australia does so well is because it has this whole continent that it keeps to itself. The reason Germany does so well is because this huge flat valley region, which is still the most productive region of Europe. And the truth is, it's a little bit of both. You need to have this huge geographic advantage, which Argentina has in spades. By the way, just have to point this out. This is to show you the diversity of Argentina while still being so arable. This is Argentina. I've got a video on national parks, so I like to look into every country's national parks a little bit. It's been taking me forever to work on, and it'll probably just never happen because it's, when you work on something too long, it just doesn't end. Like the longer you do something, like prepare for something, I feel like after a certain point, you're just not gonna make it happen. But this is Los Glacier. This is Los Guadanos. I mean, just look at these two next to each other. Then look at this one. Then look at this one. Then look at this. They've got everything you could want or need in Argentina. And so how is it they have such a diverse country and it goes poorly besides just saying military dictators, lol? And honestly, this is the problem, is that once you have all those things in abundance and you have enough people that believe we are just going to be rich forever, things start to go a little poorly for you. And, the best way I've heard this put is according to Reuters, who call it whack-a-mole economics, because, the only reason they're raising their interest rates to 97% is because their inflation's at 100 and it was over 100%. It's actually going down, it looks like. They've had a slight thing there. The only reason, there are all these sorts of things in economics where one thing has a bad effect on something else. And so if you start to look at, the economy, it's like, well, the problem is in Argentina, the people don't believe believe the government's going to pay back its debts, so borrowing money is really expensive. So they need to do a really good job on raising the money themselves with, maybe raising those taxes. But inflation is so high in the country that if you raise taxes, you're literally going to starve people. People genuinely are starving in some small places, because when food prices go up 100% and your wages don't, you're in a real problem, right? But then, okay, so instead of raising, we need to get the inflation under control. So you raise interest rates, right? And interest rates, like in theory, should fix up your currency. But after doing, and once that doesn't work, you try splitting the currency a little bit. And then once that doesn't work, you're like, okay, we'll prop up our currency using our dollar reserves, but then those start going down, and then people start thinking your debt's even more worse, and just, it's a whole big problem of like, how do you make people trust you as a country? You need to make them think you're stable. You're not a country that's reacting to stuff, you're a country of a big plan of what's going forwards, whereas Argentina looks like they're solving problems as they come up. Because the truth is, even though the macroeconomics are so important for everyone all the time, especially when we're talking about giant countries like this, the truth is, people politically, usually, even though it's the most important factor, usually people are campaigning on other stuff. Like, does it matter about the US economy, or would we rather talk about, fetuses and wombs, or guns? Does it matter what's going on in the UK, or should we talk about the trans issue, or talk about and in reality, we start going into these big culture debates on every issue. It's on both sides, right? People will talk about those things far more than just like, hey, actually, is the UK doing great? Do we need to attract foreign investment? Do we have too much foreign investment? Do we have to, are our interest rates set well? Are our tax rates set well? These are debates you could be having to make yourself wealthier, but instead you'll have debates about like, oh, is it okay that immigrants are speaking English necessarily rather than learning German? And these are big cultural issues, but the cultural issues are the ones that start to really catch up with you. The cultural issues are the ones that lead to maybe huge instability, because as part of your, plan to, in this case, admittedly, this is a war issue, not a cultural one, but like, oh yeah, if you're neutral in World War II, and maybe some people want you to not be that, maybe they'll destroy your economy as a part of doing so. Ultimately, the US replaced the United Kingdom as the dominant economic power in Argentina. So sad. But, the only coup in Argentina executed purely by the military or popular support. This first coup was a good idea. The second coup, less of a good idea. The third coup, much less of a good idea. The fourth coup, at this point, it's just how they run their government. You can expect as an outsider, oh yeah, if you lend money to Argentina, maybe in 5 years they have a coup and they decide they're not paying it back. Argentina has defaulted on their debt. A lot of people question, why should you not do that? Argentina is always the thing to point at, and it's so sad because a country that could be doing so well is doing less so. Side note, just for fun fact, I always like the Wikipedia section of like, okay, first of all, countries 58.9% Christian, but it's always fun to see the population ranking. They're the 8th biggest country in the world and the 32nd most populated. This is a country that should be featuring all the time in the international mind. It should be a huge tourism destination. Did you see these things? Don't you want to go there and there? And don't you want to go to all these places? Yes, you do. And it is a great tragedy on many levels that it's not the case, but it is a reminder that you need political stability, which is almost that weird contradiction. Have you ever, I've shown the map up before of countries that are monarchies somehow lining up with the richest countries in the world, and a lot of that is just purely that countries that have been so rich can last so long, but it's also the fact that there's this weird anti-democratic bias in successful countries. You can't go purely authoritarian and ignore all the people, but you've got to listen to the people in just the right doses, and that's the weirdest thing. I mean, I obviously I don't want to pretend that like Argentina's military coups are them listening to the people, but by being so swayable by anything that can change on a limb. Admittedly, it's true that the military is something that changes on a whim, but also, if you're willing to say, yeah, we will cancel our debts just because people elect it, that's bad. That's why, I don't know if it's in the Constitution or if it's just a well-written rule, but the US does not default on its debts. Everything else, is pushed away first. The debts is the first obligation the US pays, and so they have a super stable foreign borrowing, which means people trust it and can invest money into the country, which means they get richer, which means they need to borrow less of that same money. It's a weird counterintuitive system, and it's the whole thing of like, well, you can do whatever you want inside of a country, but there is this huge global economy to pay into, and it's a shame because, again, Argentina's a beautiful place. It's a place that should be the envy of the world, and maybe one day will be. I think right now it's going through a particularly hard patch because, you know, when the US becomes a more attractive place to invest because of higher interest rates, everywhere else becomes less attractive. But I do think maybe going against all the odds and all the, you know, every single one of these times you're like, oh, the Argentina came down a bit, but it'll be fixed soon. But okay, it's coming down a bit. But this was the last time. It feels like at some point you've got to start changing something more fundamental, and it's something I'd love to see. Anyway, this is a part of my series where I'm covering every country, at least a little bit, but not every country. I want to cover every one of the most 40 most important countries in the world. I think something that really is unhelpful when people try to learn about the world and do it on a country by country basis is realizing that there's 193 of those shits, and it's no, well actually, there's 193 countries, but do you really have to see I don't know, what's a dumb example? Do you really have to look at Kuwait and Iraq and be like, well, they're hugely different? They are different, but are Kuwait and Iraq as different as, for example, Argentina and Brazil? Are Colombia and Panama, or Peru and Ecuador as different as each other? It's hard to be sure. But anyway, one last fact, because, you know, this channel is dicking around on Google Maps. While I was dicking around just looking at Argentina recently, I noticed Buenos Aires, I noticed it from this map. Buenos Aires is part of the Buenos Aires province, and the Buenos Aires province is huge. It's like the size of a country, it has to be said. The Buenos Aires province contains Buenos Aires, and also a whole bunch more of the country for some reason. But this is something that's quite common in South America. So if you look at, say, the city of Rio de Janeiro, that is in the state of Rio de Janeiro, quite literally, right? And so the most fun versions of this, because, you know, Peru, there's Lima, which is really interesting because Lima is in the, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the Lima province. So we're not looking for the Green Goose now, we're looking for the Lima province. So we look for the Lima province. It's definitely not called that, it's called the Provincia de Lima. You'll see something interesting, which is, apparently the province is only this big. That is not what I was expecting. But if we go to, Lima province. What did I type in incorrectly there? Lima province. Okay. Provincia de Lima is different to the Lima province. But the most confusing version of that, really, did that... Also, why does it not include this thing over here? Lima includes a lot of things that clearly aren't Lima, or Lima, maybe. And then Callao over here is just a whole separate city? Yeah, Peruvian seaside city. And the airport for Lima is in Callao. That's fun. That's why they don't call it the Lima airport. That's interesting, huh? Anyway, with that said, Chile has the same thing of Santiago, and there's some other city that actually contains the airport. It's quite a common thing. But anyway, the same thing happens in Mexico. So Mexico City is not actually called Mexico City. It is called Mexico, but it's a city as opposed to Mexico, the country. And that's something that we abbreviate down to Mexico City in English, just to keep things simple. Generally, they call it CDMX, which is like Ciudad de Mexico, which admittedly is like City of Mexico. But this is Mexico, the city, which is inside Mexico, the country. That confuses a lot of people already, but Mexico City is just a city within what is known as the Mexico City province. So the state of Mexico City, sorry, it's states, not province. So this is Mexico City state, which is bigger than Mexico City. Okay, that's not too confusing, hopefully. But the state that surrounds Mexico City, the state of Mexico City, that is actually known as the state of Mexico. So in Mexico, the state, there is Mexico, the state, and inside Mexico, the state, or roughly inside of it, is Mexico, the city-state. And I hope that makes perfect sense to you all. Isn't Spanish a wonderful language? But more seriously, I do think when you look at the economic tigers of the world, all these Asian countries do so, the four great tigers of Asia, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the reason they do so well is partially by being such stable places to do business and realizing you kind of need that. And I really do think we could see an equivalent thing happen in South America if the same thing ever happens there. But the people do like their crazy politics a little bit. Or, honestly, my instinct was to blame, oh, what if it's actually just insert foreign powers interfering? Because that's the narrative you might hear in these parts. But I think that is something that is directly, the opposite of what can help you actually make the place better. By the way, also, if you ever looked around Buenos Aires, I pointed this out at some point, but it blows my mind. It looks like any European city. It genuinely looks like it's a wealthy place. This is the bit to me that is like the most convincing. Like this could be any city in central or west, central Western Europe, I'd say. Like I could believe this was a small city in Germany if I didn't know that that was not German. Like it's crazy to me just how developed Argentina looks by comparison to some of its Central and South American comrades. Look at this. Don't you just how is this not one of the wealthiest places on the planet? And just remember, next time you think that, the answer was it was, and then something happened, and then, if you just ignore these guys, and these guys, and these guys, and these guys, and this guy, then everything's great. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you'll enjoy this video, because if you didn't, then you really shouldn't have watched it all the way through. I can't say this enough, but at some point, this is on you. Thank you, though. I hope you enjoy whatever this channel is, dicking around on Google Maps, but apparently as a whole channel. And if you did, then, I don't know, don't subscribe. You'll regret it. Goodbye.